When I turned 72, I invited my entire family over for a simple Sunday dinner. Nothing fancy, just a warm meal and a hope that we could sit together again. No one showed up. And while I sat there waiting, I saw photos online of them laughing at a restaurant across town. I didn't call. I didn't text. I simply folded the napkins I had laid out, one by one, and turned off the oven. When they finally came home later that night, smelling of takeout and carelessness, I just smiled and handed my daughter-in-law a receipt she wasn't expecting. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far it travels." That evening, after clearing the untouched plates, I sat at my small kitchen table and let the house settle into its usual quiet. It wasn't the kind of quiet that brings peace, more like the kind that presses against your ribs, reminding you you're alone in a space built for many. The roast I prepared rested untouched in the fridge, and the candles I lit earlier had melted into uneven pools of wax. I'd been faking being broke for weeks at that point. An experiment, really. I wore my old sweaters, the ones with thinning elbows. I mentioned rising utility bills. I let them see a stack of coupons on my counter, and each time my children nodded politely, shifting their eyes, acting as though my words were a breeze passing through. But my grandson, my sweet boy, was different. He stopped by with groceries. He fixed the loose railing on my porch. He asked if I needed help with anything, even when I insisted I was fine. He didn't know I had won $350 million. He didn't know I was testing the people who claimed to love me. As I sat there that night, listening to the refrigerator hum, I thought about the years of birthday cards I'd written, the holidays I had cooked for, the times I had slipped cash into their hands even when they avoided my calls. And now, when I pretended to have nothing, I finally saw the truth in the way they looked at me. Thin patience, forced smiles, a quickness to leave the room. Only one pair of eyes still held real warmth. The hurt wasn't sharp. It was slow, settling like dust in the corners of a house no one bothers to clean properly. I didn't cry. At my age, you run out of tears long before you run out of disappointments. I washed the dishes from the dinner no one attended, dried my hands on a towel worn soft from years of use, and glanced at the lottery ticket tucked inside my recipe book. $350 million, and not a single person besides Mew. But they would. Soon. The next morning, the house felt colder than usual, though the thermostat hadn't moved an inch. I moved through the kitchen slowly, my slippers brushing against the linoleum as I set a single mug on the counter. I used to make a full pot of coffee, enough for whoever might stop by. Now, I made just enough for myself. It seemed wasteful to expect company. I reheated the leftover roast from the night before, even though I wasn't hungry. The smell filled the room, warm and seasoned, but it only reminded me of the laughter I'd heard through the restaurant windows in those photos. My family had been eating somewhere bright and loud while my dining room sat quiet, candles burning down to stubby columns before finally extinguishing themselves. I carried my coffee to the table and sat where I always sit, facing the window where the morning sun spreads across the lawn. The light usually comforts me, but today it felt like a spotlight on the truth I had tried to ignore. My phone lay next to my mug, screen black, untouched, no missed calls, no messages, not even a half-hearted apology. I traced the edge of the table with my fingertip. I'd spent years hosting dinners, birthdays, holidays, pouring myself into every detail. The good china, the homemade pies, the little gifts I'd wrap even when money was tight. And yet, in the silence of that morning, it was painfully clear. If I had nothing to give, they had no reason to come, except him. My grandson had stopped by late last night. I heard his car in the driveway long before he knocked. He didn't mention the family outing. He didn't offer excuses for them. He just set a paper bag of groceries on the counter and asked if I'd eaten. When I told him the truth, that the dinner remained untouched, his face shifted, a flicker of worry passing through his eyes. "Grandma, you should have called me," he said. But I didn't want to burden him, not with the truth, not with the lie I was testing. Now, in the morning light, I replayed every reaction from the rest of the family when I hinted at my financial troubles, my daughter-in-law's tight smile, my son's quick change of subject. The way they exchanged glances when they thought I wasn't looking. Maybe I shouldn't have been surprised. People reveal themselves most clearly when they think there's nothing left to gain. I rinsed my mug and set it in the drying rack. The routine steadied me. Wash, dry, put away. Movement filled the empty air. By noon, I went through old mail. Bills I didn't actually need to worry about. Coupons I left in plain sight to sell the story. I even left the pantry half empty so it looked believable. My children hadn't noticed, or maybe they had and simply didn't care. Late in the afternoon, I stepped outside to water the plants along the porch. My hands shook a little from the cool breeze, or maybe from the weight of everything I was beginning to accept. The flowers leaned toward me gently, needing attention, just like everything else I'd taken care of in my life. And just like them, I had wilted quietly behind closed doors. I stayed outside for a long while, listening to the neighborhood sounds, dogs barking, distant cars, kids riding their bikes. Normal life continued around me as if nothing were wrong, as if no one had just revealed how little they valued me. When I went back inside, the house felt even quieter, even smaller, but I wasn't ready to stop. I had started this test for a reason, and now the cracks were showing. I needed to see how deep they truly ran. And so I let the silence stretch, waiting to see if anyone besides him would notice I'd stopped calling, stopped texting, stopped asking, just to see how long it would take before they realised I was gone from their lives, if they realised at all. By the end of that week, the pattern had become impossible to ignore. No calls, no messages, no unexpected visits, except from the only person who had proven he still cared. On Thursday afternoon, I sat in my living room folding laundry that didn't really need folding. It was just something to keep my hands busy. The house made small settling sounds, the kind you notice only when there's no conversation, no footsteps, no life moving through the halls. I caught myself listening for my son's truck in the driveway, even though I knew better by now. Just after 3, I heard voices outside. Familiar, but not for me. I peeked through the curtain and saw my son and daughter-in-law getting out of their car, carrying bags from a home decor store. They walked right past my front steps without looking up. My heart tugged, just a little, but I stayed where I was, quiet behind the curtain. They were heading into their own house next door. We used to live like neighbours who were family. Now it felt more like family who were strangers. I waited, wondering if they'd come over after they put their things inside. They didn't. I went back to folding the same sweater for the 3rd time. Later that evening, while I was slicing an apple for dinner, laughter drifted through the open window. My son, my daughter-in-law, and a friend of theirs I recognised from holidays. Their plates clinked, their voices rose and fell in warm tones. I shut the window gently, not to block the sound entirely, but to soften it. I suppose I was still protecting my own heart. I sat down with my plate, a plain apple and a couple of crackers, and let the house embrace its familiar stillness. These quiet dinners had become the new normal, and yet each one carved a little deeper, reminding me that I was a presence they had learned to overlook. The next morning, I walked out to get the mail. My son was in his driveway, loading something into his car. For a moment, I thought he might wave. Instead, he nodded once, a polite, distant gesture, and went right back to what he was doing. I nodded back. It was all I could do. Inside the mailbox, tucked between flyers and bills, was a postcard from my grandson. He'd sent it from a nearby town. Nothing fancy, just a picture of a lake and a note saying he wished he could have stayed longer the other night. That postcard warmed a part of my chest I thought had gone numb. By mid-afternoon, I heard more movement next door. This time, whispers carried through the wall. My daughter-in-law's voice was soft but sharp enough to cut through the quiet. "She's exaggerating," she said. "She's not as broke as she says." A pause. "And even if she is, we have our own lives." My son mumbled something I couldn't make out. I didn't lean closer. I didn't have to. I already knew what was happening. Their concern only appeared when it served them. I returned to my chair by the window, the postcard resting in my lap. All the pieces were falling together, small things I had brushed aside, moments I had explained away, last-minute cancellations, holidays where they'd forgotten to invite me, the hesitations when I mentioned needing help. They hadn't changed because I pretended to be broke, Pretending had only revealed what had been there all along. And sitting in that same quiet room, sunlight stretching across the carpet, I began to understand the truth with a clarity that stung. In this family, love had become conditional, but I wasn't done testing the conditions. Not yet. By the weekend, the air between our houses felt different, thin, stretched, as if one strong word could make it tear. I kept moving through my days the way I always had, quietly, deliberately giving myself small tasks so the hours wouldn't sit too heavily on my shoulders. But now, every chore carried an echo of the truth I had finally allowed myself to see. On Saturday morning, I dusted the bookshelf in the living room. My fingers brushed over old family photos, birthdays, graduations, Christmas mornings, my son as a boy missing his 2 front teeth, my daughter-in-law smiling wide the first year she joined us, my grandson sitting on my lap, holding a wooden train. Each picture once felt like a treasure. Now they felt like postcards from a country I no longer lived in. I kept one frame in my hand longer than the others. It was from a Thanksgiving years ago. Everyone crowded around the table, reaching for mashed potatoes, laughing at something my husband had said. I remembered cooking from dawn that year, making 3 pies because my daughter-in-law's favourite kept changing. I remembered the warmth of that day. I set the frame back carefully, but the warmth didn't return. Around noon, I stepped outside to sweep the porch. My daughter-in-law's voice drifted across the yard again. Sharp, impatient. She was on the phone, pacing with big, exaggerated steps the way she always did when she wanted neighbours to know she was upset. No, I'm telling you, she'll manage, she said. She always does. A pause. Besides, we can't keep bailing her out. We have our own goals. I swept slowly, pushing the fallen leaves into a neat line. She didn't look over. I didn't expect her to. I finished the porch and went inside, setting the broom against the wall. I stood in the entryway for a moment, letting the quiet settle again. Quiet had become my daily companion, but today it felt heavier, like it was trying to tell me something I wasn't ready to hear. I heated a pot of vegetable soup and sat at the table with my bowl. The steam rose in pale spirals, soft against the sunlight coming in through the lace curtains. As I ate, I thought back to simpler times, when my son used to call every week, when my daughter-in-law used to ask me for advice, when my grandson was small enough to nap on my shoulder. They had once included me in everything. Slowly, over the years, I had been shifted to the margins without realizing it. After lunch, I walked to the spare room where I kept my sewing supplies. I hadn't sewn in months, but I picked up a piece of fabric and threaded a needle anyway. The gentle pull of thread through cloth settled me. It reminded me that even if the world around me changed, my hands still knew how to create something steady. I was halfway through stitching a simple hem when I heard a car door slam. Voices followed, my son and daughter-in-law leaving again. I stayed in the sewing room, listening as the sound of their engine faded down the street. I wondered where they were going this time. Dinner with friends? A weekend getaway? Somewhere fun enough that my existence wouldn't even cross their minds? The house returned to its stillness. I inhaled slowly, letting the quiet clear my thoughts. The truth was simple. I had been living in the shadows of their priorities for a long time. I just hadn't recognized it because I kept making excuses. They're busy, they're stressed, they're tired. But those excuses didn't hold up anymore. Not after the test I had set for them. Not after watching how easy it was for them to forget me when they believed I had nothing left to give. As the afternoon slid into early evening, I finished the hem and folded the fabric neatly on the table. The house glowed softly with the setting sun, golden light stretching across the floor like a warm blanket. I sat there quietly, eyes on the window, listening to the slow ticking of the clock on the wall. Later, I walked outside again to check the mailbox. There was nothing inside today. No postcard from my grandson. No letter. Just bills and advertisements. I carried them inside and set them on the counter. For a long time, I stood there, staring at the refrigerator where the lottery ticket was tucked safely behind an old recipe card. $350 million, hidden in plain sight. A secret with the power to change everything. A secret that already revealed more about my family than I ever would have learned otherwise. I touched the fridge door lightly, then let my hand fall to my side. People show you who they are when they think you have nothing to offer. And my family had shown me exactly that. I turned off the kitchen light and walked toward the living room, letting the last of the day's sunlight guide me. Tomorrow, I told myself, things would begin to shift. Not for them. No, they'd already made their choices. For me. For the first time in a long while, I felt something warm settle in my chest. Not hope. Something stronger. Resolve. On Sunday morning, I woke earlier than usual. The house was still dim, the kind of quiet that settles before the sun decides what kind of day it plans to be. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and brewed a small pot of tea. The steam curled up gently, warming my face as I held the cup between my palms. I sat at the kitchen table and looked out the window, watching the light stretch across the yard. Nothing had changed out there. Same driveway, same porch, same fence line, but something inside me had shifted overnight. A line had been crossed, and I wasn't going to step back over it. By mid-morning, I decided to tidy the guest room. I stripped the sheets, shook out the pillows, and swept the wooden floor. My grandson had mentioned visiting again soon, and I wanted the room to feel welcoming for him. He always noticed small things, fresh towels, his favourite blanket folded at the end of the bed. He never took those gestures for granted. As I tucked the corners of the sheet, I heard footsteps outside. My son and daughter-in-law were leaving again, heading to their car with gym bags and travel mugs. I watched from the window, unseen. They didn't look toward my house, didn't wave, didn't pause. The engine hummed to life, and they drove away without a second thought. When the street fell quiet again, I finished making the bed and walked back to the living room. The postcard from my grandson sat on the side table. I picked it up, running my thumb over the picture of the lake. A simple note, but it held more care than anything I'd received from his parents in months. Around noon, I made myself a tuna sandwich and sat outside on the porch to eat. A soft breeze carried the smell of cut grass from somewhere down the block. It was peaceful out there, strangely peaceful, like the world had given me space to think. I thought back to the early years, when my son used to call me before making big decisions, when my daughter-in-law used to bring me small gifts, candles, scarves, little things she said made her think of me. I used to believe those gestures came from love. Now I wondered if they had simply come from convenience. After lunch, I walked through the house again, letting my fingers skim over the furniture, the picture frames, the quilt draped over the couch. 40 years of memories lived inside these walls, 40 years of giving, supporting, helping, and in return, my worth had come down to whether or not I had anything left to offer. I stopped in front of the refrigerator. My hand hovered near the recipe card hiding the lottery ticket. That little slip of paper was the only thing in the house that held real power. Not because of the money, but because of the truth it had already brought to the surface. I didn't take it out. Not yet. But for the first time since the drawing, I let myself imagine what life would look like when I finally did. Late afternoon sunlight spilled across the floor as I sat on the couch and rested my hands in my lap. The quiet felt different now. Not heavy, not lonely, just honest. My grandson texted me around 5. "Grandma, do you need anything today?" I smiled at the screen, small and real. I typed back, "No, sweetheart, I'm just fine." Because for the first time in a long time, I truly was. On Monday, I woke with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't joy exactly, more like a steady calm settling into my bones. I made oatmeal for breakfast, stirred in a little honey, and sat at the table while the sunlight crept across the linoleum in slow, gentle stripes. I checked my phone. Nothing from my son, nothing from my daughter-in-law, but a good morning text from my grandson waited at the top of the screen. I replied with a small smile on my face, then slipped the phone into my pocket and went about my day. By late morning, I stepped outside to water the azaleas along the walkway. The soil was dry and I tilted the watering can slowly, letting the water soak deep. As I worked, my daughter-in-law's SUV pulled into the driveway next door. She got out carrying 2 shopping bags, designer ones. Her heels clicked sharply against the concrete as she walked up their steps. She didn't glance my way, but her voice carried across the yard as she took a phone call. "No, she hasn't asked for money again," she said. "Maybe she finally understands we can't support her. Besides, She should have saved better. It's not our job to pick up after her." She paused, then added, quieter but still clear enough, "And honestly, if she's struggling, maybe it's time she sells that house." I kept watering the flowers, slow and steady. The water in the can trembled only slightly. I didn't let myself react, not outwardly, not to her. When she went inside, I carried the empty can back to the porch and sat in the rocking chair. The breeze rustled the leaves overhead. The quiet wrapped around me, but this time it didn't sting. It clarified. I rocked gently, thinking about every small moment that had brought me here. The missed dinners, the silence, the excuses. The way they had stepped back the second they believed I had nothing left to offer. My hands rested on the armrests, steady and sure. Around noon, my son's truck drove up. He stepped out, glancing at my porch for half a second before heading straight inside his house. No wave. No hello. The front door shut behind him with a soft thud. I watched the closed door for a moment, then stood and went back inside my own house. I made a cup of tea, chamomile this time, and sat at the kitchen table. The refrigerator hummed behind me, almost like it was reminding me of the secret tucked between my recipe cards. $350 million. They had no idea who they were treating this way. By mid-afternoon, I heard their voices again through the shared wall. Muffled but distinct enough. "She's fine," my son said. "Stop worrying about it." "I'm not worrying," my daughter-in-law replied. "I'm being practical. We can't keep feeling guilty every time she mentions bills. She made her choices." A laugh, the kind you only let out when you feel completely unthreatened. I sat down on the couch and let the sound fade. I wasn't angry, I wasn't even hurt anymore. I had reached a different place entirely, a place where their words only confirmed what I already knew. My grandson texted me again in the early evening. "Grandma, I'm stopping by tomorrow. Want me to bring anything?" I typed back, "Just you." As the sun dipped lower, filling the room with warm gold, I rested my hands in my lap and breathed slowly, deeply. The silence didn't swallow me, it steadied me, because now I wasn't just observing their choices, I was preparing for my own. On Tuesday morning, I woke before my alarm, though I rarely needed one these days. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and set out 2 mugs instead of 1. My grandson had texted me last night, confirming he'd stop by after his morning class. Just the thought of company, real company, lifted something in my chest. I fried 2 eggs, buttered toast, and let the smell fill the kitchen. It reminded me of the old days when my house was the place everyone gathered, when breakfast meant noise and footsteps and voices overlapping. Now the only sound was the soft tick of the clock above the fridge. A little after 10, I heard a familiar car pull into the driveway. I peeked through the window, and there he was, my grandson, stepping out with that easy smile he had inherited from my husband. He carried a small tote bag, probably bringing me something I didn't ask for, something thoughtful, something he could have spent on himself but chose to spend on me instead. I opened the door before he could knock. "Morning, Grandma," he said, leaning in to give me a gentle hug. "Come in, sweetheart," I replied. "I made breakfast." He looked at the second place setting on the table and laughed softly. "You always think ahead." But it wasn't habit, it was instinct, the instinct to care for someone who cared back. We sat down together, and he told me about his classes, his part-time job, and how he was saving up for a used car. Nothing fancy, just reliable. He mentioned it casually, but I noticed the way he rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed to talk about money in front of someone he believed had none. I listened carefully, nodding, storing his words away. Every detail mattered. Halfway through breakfast, movement outside caught his eye. My son was walking to his car, glancing toward my house with a startled expression, surprised, maybe even annoyed, to see his son sitting at my kitchen table instead of theirs. He hesitated. Then he opened his car door and left without waving. My grandson didn't comment, but I saw the flicker in his eyes, the silent disappointment he tried to mask. When we finished eating, he stood and washed the dishes before I could protest. "You cooked. I'll clean," he said with a grin. I watched him move around my kitchen like it was a familiar place, not a burden or an obligation. When he set the last dish in the rack, he turned to me more seriously. "Grandma, if you ever need help with bills or groceries or anything, please tell me. I mean it." I felt something tighten in my throat. Not hurt, gratitude. real deep gratitude. "I know," I said softly, "and that means more than you think." He stayed a little longer, fixing a cabinet hinge that had been loose for months. My own son never noticed it, not once, but my grandson had spotted it immediately. Before leaving, he hugged me again, tighter this time. "I'll come back tomorrow," he said, just to check in. After he drove away, the house felt warm in a different way, not from noise or company, but from the reassurance that kindness still lived in at least one corner of my family. But that warmth didn't last long. Late that afternoon, my daughter-in-law came to the door. Not to visit, just to collect a package that had been wrongly delivered to my address. She didn't step inside. She didn't ask how I was doing. She just looked over my shoulder, noticing the second mug still on the table. "You had company?" she asked, her voice too light to be casual. "My grandson stopped by," I replied. She nodded once, expression tightening just slightly, just enough to reveal something she didn't intend to show. "Well, just make sure he's not giving you false hope," she said. "He's young. He has his own responsibilities. He shouldn't feel obligated to take care of you." I met her eyes, and for the first time, I felt no sting, no confusion, no ache, just clarity. "He doesn't feel obligated," I said quietly. "He feels love." The words landed between us like a small earthquake. She opened her mouth as if to respond, then closed it again. She took the package and walked off without another word. I shut the door gently, leaning against it for a moment. The truth was no longer whispering around the edges. It was standing right in front of me, and soon I would stop pretending I didn't see it. On Wednesday, the house felt alive in a way it hadn't for a long time. I opened the curtains early, letting the sunlight wash across the living room. My grandson had promised to stop by again after lunch, and the thought alone lifted the edges of my morning. I made vegetable soup and set out crackers in a small bowl. Not a feast, just something warm to share. I moved slowly, but my steps felt lighter than usual. The quiet didn't weigh on me today. It simply waited. Around 1 o'clock, a car pulled into the driveway, but it wasn't my grandson's. I looked through the window and saw my son stepping out, shoulders stiff, jaw tight. He didn't come over often unless something was wrong or he wanted something. My stomach settled into a familiar heaviness. He didn't knock gently. He knocked like someone announcing authority. I opened the door anyway. "Mom, can we talk?" he asked, not bothering with a greeting. I stepped aside and let him in. He stood in the hallway, eyes scanning the house as though searching for signs of chaos or need, anything that might justify the version of me they'd built in their heads. "I heard he was here yesterday," he said, meaning my grandson. His voice held a strain he didn't mask well. "Yes," I replied simply. "He had breakfast with me." He shifted his weight, looking toward the kitchen where 2 bowls sat drying in the rack. Something about that seemed to unsettle him. "Mom?" "We're worried," he began. I waited. "You've been talking a lot about bills, needing help, being short on money, and now you're spending more time with him. He's young. He shouldn't feel responsible for you." I let his words settle. They didn't hurt anymore. They revealed. "I never asked him for money," I said calmly. "I never asked any of you." He pressed his lips together, then sighed in that way people do when they think they're being patient with someone fragile. "Well, we think it's best if you start making plans. Maybe consider selling this house. It's too big for you, and you can't keep living like this." "Like what?" I asked. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Barely getting by," he said. "We can't step in every time there's a problem." I looked at him for a long, steady moment. The house was spotless. The pantry had food, the yard was tidy. The only thing barely getting by was our relationship, and he didn't even see it. Before I could respond, a car door slammed outside. My grandson. He walked up the steps with his usual easy energy and smiled when he saw me. But when he spotted his father standing in the hallway, the smile faded. "Dad," he said slowly. "What's going on?" His father straightened. "I'm just talking to your grandmother about options." "Options for what?" my grandson asked, glancing at me, confused. My son hesitated, then said, "She might not be able to keep this place much longer." My grandson's face shifted, first confusion, then disbelief, then something protective and sharp. "That's not your decision," he said, "and she's not helpless." My son's jaw tightened. "You don't understand the situation." No, my grandson replied, stepping closer to me. I understand it better than you think. Silence pooled between us. My grandson turned to me gently. Grandma, do you want me to stay while he's here? I smiled softly. No, sweetheart. I'm fine. But he didn't move far. He stood near me, a quiet witness, a reminder that I wasn't alone, not in the ways that mattered. My son looked between us, something unsettled flickering across his face. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe fear. Maybe the realization that the ground beneath him wasn't as steady as he thought. He left a few minutes later without looking back. After the door closed, my grandson let out a slow breath and turned to me. Are they giving you a hard time? He asked. I reached for his hand and squeezed it gently. They're showing me who they are, I said, and so are you. His eyes softened. I'm not going anywhere. I believed him, and as I watched him move around the kitchen telling me about his day, something settled inside me with the weight of truth. The divide in my family wasn't forming. It had already formed, and soon there would be no hiding from what came next. On Thursday morning, I woke with a heaviness I couldn't shake. Not sadness, not fear, just the weight of knowing a door had closed, quietly but permanently. I moved through the kitchen with slow, steady steps, brewing coffee and slicing a pear for breakfast. The house felt calm, almost expectant, like it knew something was coming. I sat at the table, letting the steam from my mug warm my hands. My grandson texted to say he'd stop by in the afternoon. That thought alone softened the morning, but the quiet didn't last long. Around 10, I heard footsteps outside, quick, decisive ones. I looked through the curtain and saw my daughter-in-law walking up my steps with a folder in her hand. She didn't smile. She didn't pretend. She knocked sharply 3 times. I opened the door a few inches. Good morning. Can I come in? She asked, already stepping forward. I let her in, though every part of me knew this wasn't a visit of concern. She stood in the middle of my living room, her eyes scanning everything. The clean floors, the neatly arranged blankets, the tea set on the sideboard. Like she was assessing inventory, not visiting family. We need to talk, she said, opening the folder. Wade and I looked into some things. You have overdue property taxes, and you mentioned rising bills. You're clearly struggling. I never asked for help, I said softly. I know, she replied, but that's part of the problem. You don't ask. You expect us to guess. I almost laughed, not out of humour, but the absurdity. I had never expected anything, not once. She flipped a page and slid a document toward me. This is a list of senior living facilities nearby. We think it's best if you consider moving into one, for your safety and frankly, she hesitated, then finished, for everyone's peace of mind. I picked up the paper. The list blurred slightly, though my vision was perfectly fine. You want me out of my home, I said. We want you somewhere you can be cared for properly, she replied. Her tone was crisp, rehearsed. This house is too big for you, and you can't maintain it. I looked around the room. Everything was spotless. Nothing was broken. Nothing was neglected. You've been struggling, she repeated, almost impatient, and it's not fair to put that on us. A quiet settled between us, not heavy, revealing. I folded the paper and set it on the coffee table. I appreciate your concern, I said calmly, but I'm not going anywhere. Her jaw tightened. Wade and I made this decision together. Well, I said, meeting her eyes, you made it without me. She blinked, surprised by my tone. Then her voice softened into something falsely sympathetic. It's better this way. For everyone. No, I said, it's easier for you. That's different. Her mouth opened slightly, like she was ready to argue, but the front door opened before she could speak. My grandson stepped inside, holding a bag of groceries. Grandma, I brought. He stopped when he saw her. His expression hardened instantly. What's going on? He asked. She straightened, her voice taking on a brittle politeness. Just discussing some options. He set the grocery bag down and stepped beside me. What kind of options? The kind that aren't your business, she snapped. They are, he said quietly, when they involve my grandmother being pushed out of her home. Colour rose in her cheeks. You don't understand. No, he said, calm but firm. You don't understand what family means. She glared at him, then turned to me. Think about what I said. And she left, slamming the door behind her. The house stilled. My grandson exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Are you okay? Yes, I said, and I was. He opened the folder she'd left and skimmed the papers, his jaw tightening. They really want you out. I know. He placed a hand on mine, steady and warm. You're not going anywhere, Grandma. Not unless you choose to. And if they think they can force you, they're wrong. His certainty was a balm I didn't know I needed, because now I knew exactly how far they were willing to go, and soon they would learn how far I was willing to go too. On Friday morning, the air felt still, heavy like the pause before a storm breaks. I woke up earlier than usual and sat at the edge of my bed for a while, letting the silence settle around me. I knew what the day needed to be. Not loud, not emotional, just clear. I made tea and buttered a slice of toast, though I barely touched either. My mind wasn't scattered, it was sharp, focused in a way it hadn't been since my husband died. I moved through the house slowly, touching the back of chairs, smoothing out wrinkles in the tablecloth, straightening picture frames. Not because they needed fixing, but because I needed grounding. By mid-morning, I decided it was time. I walked to the kitchen, opened the drawer where I kept my recipe cards, and slid out the one that hid what they all assumed I never had, the lottery ticket, the one worth $350 million. I held it between my fingers for a moment, letting its weight, its quiet truth, sink into me again. This wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. And the truth needed to be delivered in person. I called my son and asked him to come over with his wife. My voice was steady, unshaken. They agreed quickly, thinking, hoping that I had finally come to my senses about the senior living plan. While I waited, I set the dining room table with 3 mugs and a plate of shortbread cookies. My grandson wasn't here yet. He had class, but I knew he'd arrive soon after. He always did. Their car pulled in at noon sharp. I watched from the window as they walked up my steps, purposeful, confident, certain they were about to guide me toward the decision they wanted. I opened the door before they knocked. "We're glad you called," my daughter-in-law said, brushing past me into the house. My son followed, glancing around as though expecting to see packed boxes or signs that I was preparing to move. "Let's sit," I said, motioning toward the dining table. They took their seats. I sat across from them, placing the folded lottery ticket on the tablecloth, face down. "So," my son began, "have you given some thought to what we talked about?" "I have," I said. My daughter-in-law leaned forward, clasping her hands. "Good, because the facility I found has excellent ratings. They handle meals, transportation, medications." I lifted a hand gently, stopping her. "I won't be moving." Her smile froze. "We're trying to help you." "No," I said. "You're trying to remove me." The silence that followed was tight, fragile. My son started to speak, but I placed the ticket, now unfolded, face up on the table. They stared at it, uncomprehending for a second. Then their eyes widened. What is that?" my son asked. "It's the reason I know exactly who I can trust." My daughter-in-law leaned closer, reading the numbers again and again. "Is this? Are you?" "Yes," I said. "I won the lottery months ago, $350 million. Their mouths parted in perfect unison, shock, disbelief, greed all flickering across their faces like shifting light. You never told us," my son whispered. "I didn't need to," I replied. "I needed to see how you acted when you believed I had nothing." My daughter-in-law's face tightened. "Why would you test us?" I didn't answer her question. Instead, I asked mine. "When I said I was struggling, did either of you ever offer help? A meal? A ride? A single dollar?" They didn't speak. "When I skipped family dinners, did either of you knock on my door?" Silence. "When you made plans to move me out of my home, did you ask what I wanted?" My son swallowed, but no words came. I leaned back in my chair, my voice even. I saw everything I needed. Just then the front door opened softly. My grandson. He stepped inside, saw the scene, and froze. I motioned him over. He came to my side without hesitation. My daughter-in-law looked at him, panic tightening her expression. "We didn't know," she said. "If we had known." "That's exactly why I didn't tell you," I said. My grandson looked at the ticket, then at me, eyes wide. Not with greed, but with shock and worry. "Grandma, why didn't you tell me?" I placed my hand over his. "Because you never needed the money to show me love." Their faces twisted, hurt, frustration, denial, but none of it moved me. For the first time in years, I wasn't trembling, I wasn't second-guessing, I wasn't hoping, I was certain. And there was nothing left for them to say. My son was the first to break the silence. "Mom, We didn't mean to make you feel abandoned, he said, his voice cracking in a way I hadn't heard since he was a boy. We were trying to be practical. I looked at him, the man I raised, the child I once carried on my hip, and waited for the words that should have come years earlier. They never did. My daughter-in-law leaned forward, palms flat on the table. We can fix this, she insisted. We can start over. You don't have to make any decisions right now. But I had already made them. I folded the lottery ticket once and slid it into my cardigan pocket. Their eyes followed every inch of the motion, like the paper itself held oxygen. I'm not angry, I said softly, just awake. My son swallowed. Mom, please, we can help you manage the money. It's a lot. You'll need guidance. My grandson stiffened beside me. She doesn't need your guidance. My daughter-in-law snapped her head toward him. You don't understand. You're young. You don't know how these things work. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't flinch. I know she deserves better than being pushed out of her home. Their faces tightened, defensive, embarrassed, caught. I stood slowly, bracing my hand lightly on the table. My knees aren't what they used to be, but my voice had never been stronger. I'm changing my will, I said. The air left the room. My daughter-in-law tried to recover first. We're family. You can't make decisions like this without talking to us. I just did, I replied. My son's lips parted, but no sound came out. He looked at me, then at his son, then back at me again, as if trying to rearrange all the choices that had led him to this exact moment. I'm not cutting you out of my life, I continued, but I am cutting you out of my dependence. Those days are over. My daughter-in-law's voice cracked. So you're rewarding him because he played the hero? I turned toward my grandson. His eyes were glassy, but steady, strong, loyal. I'm rewarding him, I said, because he showed up. She opened her mouth to argue, but my son raised a hand. Tired, defeated. Stop, he muttered. He knew. He finally knew. I walked toward the foyer, and they followed like reluctant shadows. At the door, I faced them one last time. Love without kindness, I said quietly, isn't love, it's convenience. My daughter-in-law blinked hard. So that's it. That's it, I said. I opened the door for them, not out of cruelty, but closure. They stepped out slowly, as if their legs didn't belong to them. My son turned back once, hoping for something, a crack in my resolve, a sign that this was temporary, a hint that I would chase after him like I always had. But I simply said, take care, and for the first time in years, I meant it from a distance. My grandson stayed behind, closing the door gently after them. He didn't say anything at first. He just wrapped his arms around me and held me like someone who knew exactly what I had just done and why it mattered. When he pulled back, he wiped a tear from his cheek. Grandma, I'm proud of you. And for the first time in a long while, I felt proud of myself too. Because reclaiming your power doesn't always look like shouting. Sometimes it looks like finally choosing peace. That evening, after the door closed behind my son and daughter-in-law, the house settled into a quiet unlike any I'd ever felt before. Not empty, not lonely, just honest. The kind of quiet that comes when the truth finally has room to breathe. My grandson and I sat together in the living room. No rush, no tension. Just two people sharing a moment that felt like the end of something old and the beginning of something better. He helped me make tea, pouring it into the floral cups I used to save for holidays. I realized suddenly that I didn't need to save anything anymore. Not my good china, not my kindness, not my voice. We talked about simple things, his classes, a movie he wanted to see, the new bookstore opening downtown. I listened, letting his words remind me that life was still happening around me, still moving forward, still offering pieces of joy, even after so much disappointment. When he finally stood to leave, he hugged me the way he always did, tight, warm, steady. I'll come by tomorrow, he said. I know, I replied, and for once I felt sure. After he drove away, I turned off the lights and stood by the window, watching the street settle into dusk. My son's house remained dark. No one came back to knock, no one called, no one tried to undo what had been said. And I didn't wait for them. I walked to the dining table and picked up the list of senior living facilities my daughter-in-law had brought. I folded it neatly and placed it in the recycling bin. Then I smoothed my hands on the counter, feeling the familiar grooves of the old wood. This was my home, my history, my comfort, and I wasn't leaving it for anyone's convenience. Before bed, I slipped the lottery ticket back behind the recipe card, not because I wanted to hide it, but because it was safe there. Quiet, mine. The money didn't scare me anymore. The responsibility didn't scare me. The future didn't scare me. What scared me was how long I had allowed myself to believe I needed their approval to stay whole. I turned off the last lamp and let the house fall into a soft glow from the porch light. The air felt calmer than it had in months, maybe years. My steps down the hallway felt lighter, my breathing easier, my shoulders no longer carrying the weight of being overlooked. In my bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and thought about what my life used to be, a constant effort to keep everyone close, to smooth every rough edge, to earn a love that should have never needed earning. Now I understood. Love that must be proven isn't love. Love that disappears when money does was never real. I pulled the blankets over my legs and lay back on the pillows. The quiet wrapped around me, gentle and warm. A different kind of quiet than the one that haunted me before. This one held space. This one felt like freedom. And before I closed my eyes, I whispered a truth that had taken me a lifetime to learn. Some things don't need forgiving. They just need leaving behind. The house creaked softly as if agreeing, and for the first time in a very long time, I fell asleep, not hoping for anyone to choose me, but grateful that I had finally chosen myself.